So hello, welcome to the third Royal Rota done remotely, as we're all getting used to seeing into the back of our homes. I dressed mine up with a plant pot just now. I thought it might be slightly more interesting. The bookshelf, you know, everyone's talking about bookshelves and what's behind them at the moment. Well, mine's in the corner here, so you can't see my my very intellectual range of books. Lizzie, what have you got behind you?
Sorry, I've got the windows behind me, so
It's quite bright today, actually.
Very
sunny
bright
day.
Yeah, let's see if you can keep that plant alive during all the time we're in.
I'm not entirely sure whether this one's real. I'm actually feeling it now. It's definitely not real, so I don't need to worry about keeping it alive. I've got on my bookshelf, for example, I have got a sort of Spanish dictionary and other interesting things. Nothing quite as intellectual as what everyone else seems to have behind them at the moment. But anyway, there's a few royal books in there as well. And some of these events of the past week are going to make it into the history books, aren't they, in the future?
Yeah, I think the Queen's broadcast, it was, other than the times where we hear from her at Christmas, it's only the 5th televised address she's made to the nation. So quite historic.
There were a few discrepancies, whether it was the 5th or the 4th, and we had to sort of try and drill down, didn't we, in the end? We decided that this broadcast that she made on Sunday to the nation and the Commonwealth, I'm sure everyone all over the world has seen it. Certainly 24 million people watched it in the UK, which is getting on for a third of the population here, which is quite staggering, plus all of those that might watched it on social media and catch up afterwards, of course. But we think it was number 5. Why don't you run through the other times? It was the 4th in terms of sort of sadness, and then 1 included the Diamond Jubilee. But I mean, whatever way you look at it, 4 or 5, given that she's been Queen since 1952, 68 years as monarch, she's only given these things very, very rarely indeed. That rather shows just quite how significant these times are that we're all living through.
Yeah, I think the fact that they are so rare makes them even more powerful. I think the fact that she's only made 5 in her reign, as you say, makes people sort of sit up and take notice when she does address the nation. So shall I go through the other 4 times she's...
The other 4 times that she's done it, actually the first one started in 1991, didn't it, with the Gulf War?
With the Gulf War, and then 1997, which was following the death of Princess Diana, 2002, following the death of the Queen Mother, and then 2012, which was around the Diamond Jubilee celebrations.
And then 2020 for the outbreak of coronavirus. And we'll play you what the Queen said very shortly. I mean, I think it's worth, it was 4.5 minutes, wasn't it? And I think it's probably worth just hearing her in full again. But it was clearly the royal event of the week. And I think a lot of people were saying, look, when is the right time for the Queen to give a message? Do you do it too soon and overshadow what the politicians are doing? Do you leave it for a while and look like you're sort of not in touch, not caring, whatever accusations people might want to hurl at the Queen? Do you think it was roughly about the right time?
I think, as you say, there will have been some very careful planning with number 10 about when she does this. We had that written statement initially, but there was only going to be one moment where she addressed the nation in person. And I think, the time they probably felt the numbers of people that are getting infected and the number of deaths are huge at the moment. And this was a real message of hope and encouragement to the nation to continue doing what we're, continue with the social distancing and continue respecting what the government is asking us to do. And it was also saying we will get through this and giving people hope.
And she wouldn't have done it too late, and nor would she have done it actually to overshadow anything that the government was doing. So if the government had a particularly important announcement to make, then she would have made sure that she didn't overshadow that. Ditto, I think they would have made sure that they wouldn't have overshadowed anything that she said. Having said that, we were both in the office, weren't we, on Sunday nights, covering the Queen for our bulletins. It was broadcast on ITV, on the BBC, on Channel 4, Channel 5. I put a picture up on my Twitter feed where you could see the Queen on at least 4 different channels. I'm sure we could have had even more, but 24 million views is quite something. And yet, within an hour of her broadcasting that was when Downing Street announced that the Prime Minister had gone into hospital. So they might not want to have overshadowed the Queen. But actually, that became for us the top story, that the Prime Minister was in hospital and the Queen was sort of shunted down to number two. So clearly that was unavoidable, but there is just so much news around at the moment, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think, with all the planning in the world, you could never have planned for that, sadly, that he had to go into hospital on Sunday night.
And we'll run through shortly, all the messages of goodwill that the royal family have given the Prime Minister as well. So it's probably worth having listened to her. It was 4 minutes long, or 4 and a bit minutes long, recorded at Windsor Castle on the previous Thursday. And some of the interesting things that we were told, Lizzie, weren't they, that the Queen only had one cameraman in there. He had to wear full-on protective clothing. He had to keep a distance from her. They even chose a room at Windsor Castle that was distant enough for them to be so far apart, and everyone else was kept in a separate room entirely.
Yeah, I think the one thing that we've learned from coronavirus is that it doesn't discriminate, that anybody can get it. We've seen from Prince Charles to the Prime Minister, and the social distancing applies to everybody, whether you are royalty, government, it applies to everyone. And they were very cautious with the Queen only having one cameraman in the room with her. The rest of the technical staff were in a separate room, to ensure that everyone, the camera crew and the Queen, were kept safe.
Yeah, absolutely. And given that the Queen's 93 years old, she's in perhaps one of the most vulnerable groups out there in terms of her age. So let's have a listen to what the Queen said. This was her message, her fifth special broadcast to the nation in her entire reign. And this was what was broadcast at 8 o'clock on Sunday night in the UK and also to the rest of the Commonwealth.
I'm speaking to you at what I know is an increasingly challenging time, a time of disruption in the life of our country, a disruption that has brought grief to some, financial difficulties to many, and enormous changes to the daily lives of us all. I want to thank everyone on the NHS frontline, as well as care workers and those carrying out essential roles, who selflessly continue their day-to-day duties outside the home in support of us all. I'm sure the nation will join me in assuring you that what you do is appreciated, and every hour of your hard work brings us closer to a return to more normal times. I also want to thank those of you who are staying at home, thereby helping to protect the vulnerable and sparing many families the pain already felt by those who have lost loved ones. Together we are tackling this disease, and I want to reassure you that if we remain united and resolute, then we will overcome it. I hope in the years to come, everyone will be able to take pride in how they responded to this challenge. And those who come after us will say the Britons of this generation were as strong as any, that the attributes of self-discipline, of quiet, good-humoured resolve, and of fellow feeling still characterize this country. The pride in who we are is not a part of our past. It defines our present and our future. The moments when the United Kingdom has come together to applaud its care and essential workers will be remembered as an expression of our national spirit, and its symbol will be the rainbows drawn by children. Across the Commonwealth and around the world, we have seen heartwarming stories of people coming together to help others, be it through delivering food parcels and medicines, checking on neighbours, or converting businesses to help the relief effort. And though self-isolating may at times be hard, many people of all faiths and of none are discovering that it presents an opportunity to slow down, pause and reflect, in prayer or meditation. It reminds me of the very first broadcast I made in 1940, helped by my sister. We, as children, spoke from here at Windsor to children who had been evacuated from their homes and sent away for their own safety. Today, once again, many will feel a painful sense of separation from their loved ones. But now, as then, we know deep down that it is the right thing to do. While we have faced challenges before, this one is different. This time we join with all nations across the globe in a common endeavor, using the great advances of science and our instinctive compassion to heal. We will succeed, and that success will belong to every one of us. We should take comfort that while we may have more still to endure, better days will return. We will be with our friends again. We will be with our families again. We will meet again. But for now, I send my thanks and warmest good wishes to you all.
So there we are. That was the entirety of the Queen's historic broadcast. I think a few things to pick out from there. I mean, the line that everybody went with the next day was that final line, wasn't it? We will meet again. So we will be with our friends again. We will be with our families again. We will meet again, she said. And I think a lot of people thought that was a deliberate reference to another difficult time that everyone went through, which was the Second World War. And famously, people around the world might not know of Dame Vera Lynn, the famous wartime songstress and heroine for many soldiers. And she had that famous song, We Will Meet Again. And a lot of people thought that that's exactly who the Queen was referring to when she said that at the very end of her message.
Yeah, it was the main thing that people focused on, wasn't it? That I said earlier, it was a message of hope, and all through it there was, if we remain united and resolute, we will overcome it, we will succeed, and that success will belong to every one of us. We will meet again. She kind of was continuously reminding people that however hard things are at the moment and however awful it is for hundreds of families across the country and the world, that we will get through this and we will come out the other side. And she's kind of, I think that the whole thing was a message of hope.
And she referenced 1940, and actually we played, I think we can do it again, because we played a little bit on Sunday night in our news of the broadcast that she made in 1940. Now, what age do we think she was then? So born 1926, about 14 or 15, we weren't quite sure, maybe. And she made that broadcast with her sister, Margaret Rose, as she refers to her in that broadcast. And that was the very first time the Queen has spoken to the nation. And that in 1940 was a message to the children of the United Kingdom, who at the time were being taken out of their homes and moved into the countryside for safety, and that mass evacuation. So let's just hear a little bit of the Queen herself. This wasn't in Sunday's broadcast, but we listened to it, didn't we? And we thought it was really worth a listen to, yeah?
Yeah.
My sister, Margaret Rose, and I feel so much for you, as we know from experience what it means to be away from those we love most of all.
And she did that broadcast in 1940 from Windsor, and she's still in Windsor now, delivering this particular message. Do you think, how well do you think it went down? Do you think, I mean, I was looking on Twitter, and the trouble with Twitter is you get a lot of polarized opinions, don't you? Either fully in support of the Queen or massively against her. A lot of the stuff that I saw on Twitter was like, well, perhaps the Queen should open up one of her palaces to be a field hospital. Perhaps she should open up her purse and donate some money to the NHS, which for all we know she might well have done privately and never speaks about. I mean, it's very hard to gauge reaction in the country through Twitter. However, how do you think it sort of went down? How do you think it landed?
I think very positively. I think I think a lot of people found it very encouraging and warm to hear from the Queen. So a lot of what I saw on social media was positive, but I suppose you're always going to get the negativity as well, aren't you?
Yes, yeah, exactly. And I think, given it's come from someone who at 93 years old has had, what are we on, like 14 prime ministers? I forget what number Boris Johnson is. She has seen crises come, she's seen crises go, she's seen events that none of us have seen in our lifetime. For someone born in 1926 who became Queen in 1952, we're now in 2020. I think for me it was almost a sense of her wisdom and her longevity, which really made that stand out above anything else that a politician could deliver.
Yeah, and we know that the message was a deeply personal message to her, and that she deliberately was reflecting on her experience. And I think that is why people listen to her and take her seriously, because she has been, on the throne for so long and seen so much that she can speak with experience about, when she says we will get through it, it's because she's seen us go through hard times before and come through it.
Now, one of the things we've spoken about on this podcast over the last couple of weeks is that her weekly audience with the Prime Minister has moved from being in face-to-face to being on the phone. And there was that picture that we showed you, what was it, last week perhaps, of the Queen and Boris, week before, with the Queen and Boris on the phone. But we now know, because that he has not only gone into hospital, but he's been moved into intensive care, that weekly audience has been paused for the time being, and she's not having that audience at all at the moment.
No, even though Dominic Raab is deputising for the Queen, for Boris Johnson.
Not the Queen.
Not the Queen. For Boris Johnson, we know that weekly calls between number 10 and the Queen are not going to take place at the moment. The Cabinet Secretary and the Prime Minister's principal private secretary will continue to have contact with the royal household on the Prime Minister's behalf. And we know that the Queen is being kept fully informed of what's happening with the Prime Minister at the moment.
Now, I'm not a political historian, but from what I know of politics, I don't think there are many times when a Prime Minister has been this sick, one of her Prime Ministers has been this seriously ill. I think in the 1950s, you start off with Winston Churchill, who had periods of illness. And also Anthony Eden and Harold Macmillan were both quite elderly, but this feels a bit different. The coronavirus is the crisis that's gripping not only this country, but all of Europe, America, and many other parts of the world at the moment. And to have her Prime Minister, who's leading the government fight, to be hospitalised and then in intensive care and given oxygen, it's quite a moment, isn't it?
Yeah, I think everyone was very shocked to learn when the Prime Minister was not only taken into hospital, but then the development was that things had got worse and that he'd been taken into intensive care. And we know that the royals, the Queen, Prince Charles and the Duke of Cambridge, they've all sent messages in the last 24 hours since he's gone into intensive care, sending their warm wishes.
And he's probably having just to look at those tweets that came out this afternoon. There was one from Buckingham Palace, which was talking about the Queen passing on her good wishes to the Prime Minister. Earlier today, it said the Queen sent a message to Carrie Symonds, that's the Prime Minister's fiancée, and to the Johnson family. Her Majesty said they were in her thoughts and she wished the Prime Minister a full and speedy recovery. We've been told also, haven't we, that the Prince of Wales and Duchess of Cornwall have passed on their good wishes. And Kensington Palace said that the Duke of Cambridge, Prince William, who we think is still in Amner Hall in Norfolk with his family, said that our thoughts are with the Prime Minister and his family, who, like so many in the UK and around the world, are affected by coronavirus. We wish him a speedy recovery at this difficult time. And then he signed it W. William. Which is the difference when he writes a tweet himself as opposed to gets his office to write one for him.
Yeah, they join a huge number of people across the world, high-profile figures across the world that have sent messages to the Prime Minister to wish him a speedy recovery.
Now, of course, Prince Charles knows what it's like to have coronavirus. He had it himself, albeit much less severely, as it turned out, than the Prime Minister, despite being more aged. Prince Charles is 51. I don't know Boris's age.
Prince Charles is how old?
Did I say 51? 71. I was running ahead with myself because I know that Boris Johnson is in his 50s, and I was just... Does anyone know his exact age?
55.
55. So he's 55. Prince Charles is 71.
Yeah.
Therefore, getting coronavirus we thought might be more serious for Prince Charles. As it turns out, it's more serious for the Prime Minister. But when the Prince spoke to officially open the Nightingale Hospital last week, you could hear in his voice, couldn't you? It definitely had some remnants of the virus still in him, and a lot of people have had it. We spoke to someone in the office, didn't we, the other day, who still sounded a little bit different in terms of their vocal cords.
Yeah, he did. This was a royal first, which we don't get to say very often, last Friday when he did a virtual opening of the Nightingale Hospital in London, which is one of the temporary hospitals that's been built very quickly, in less than 2 weeks, and can take up to 4,000 patients at any one time, which is an incredible feat.
Now, I was down there for the opening, and me and you go to lots of openings. You were told you couldn't go as minimum number of staff. Social distancing had to happen there as anywhere else. The opening ceremony in the floor, all the politicians and various members of the medical staff had little sort of crosses that they had to stand on that were all spaced out there. They all came forward to the microphones and spoke. And then in this plasma screen outside the hospital popped up this face of the Prince of Wales, who was at his home in Birkhall on the Balmoral estate in Scotland.
Yeah, what I loved was after he'd finished the opening, Clarence House shared a tweet of the Prince giving his speech, and it sort of reminded me of homes probably right across the country of people trying to balance iPads and computers and whatever they can find to get them in the right position to talk to people. He sort of balanced them on a pile of books.
One of which actually is I think Rebecca English from the Daily Mail pointed out was Harmony, the book that he wrote himself. I mean, I've got mine here, by the way, balanced up on a bit of a pad of A4 paper and an old file. I don't even know what's in that file, just to give it a bit of height. And Prince Charles too had his laptop propped up on the desk in front of him, which I thought was quite amusing. Yeah,
it's been a lovely insight into people's homes, and it was just as lovely to see inside Prince Charles's office that it like he's in.
And actually, there was a lot of talk about one of the pictures behind them that looked like a sort of a white silhouette, and we couldn't work out whether he'd sort of cut that picture out or whether it was a bit of artwork, and no one's actually got to the bottom of it yet. But where was it in the picture? About here behind him, I think. Anyway,
my favourite tweet was somebody had photoshopped your face into it. So
my face, really? I haven't seen that.
Seen that tweet. It's very fun.
Maybe I'll go and take a look. So he gave that opening, and as you said at the start of this conversation, it was a royal first, a virtual opening, a remote opening, because of that's how we're getting used to everything being done now. So let's just happen to listen to what he said about this hospital, and you've already mentioned it, Lizzie. Just a few months ago, we were looking on at China in astonishment that they built a hospital in 2 weeks. Okay, the Nightingale Hospital in London isn't a new building, it's inside an exhibition centre, but pretty much to turn around a hospital in 9 or 10 days is quite phenomenal. And they will soon start taking their first patients. So let's just have a listen to what the Prince said from Scotland, which was being broadcast on a plasma screen in East London as he virtually opened the NHS Nightingale Hospital.
Secretary of State, ladies and gentlemen, if I may say so, I was enormously touched to have been asked to open the Nightingale Hospital as part of a mass mobilization to withstand the coronavirus crisis. It is, without doubt, a spectacular and almost unbelievable feat of work in every sense, from its speed of construction in just 9 days, as we've heard, to its size and the skills of those who have created it. An example, if ever one was needed, of how the impossible could be made possible and how we can achieve the unthinkable through human will and ingenuity. The creation of this hospital is, above all, the result of an extraordinary collaboration and partnership between NHS managers, the military, and all those involved to create a centre on a scale that has never been seen before in the United Kingdom. To convert one of the largest national conference centres into a field hospital, starting with 500 beds and with a potential of 4,000, is quite frankly incredible. Now, I was one of the lucky ones to have COVID-19 relatively mildly. And if I may say so, I'm so glad to see the Secretary of State has also recovered. But for some, it will be a much harder journey. I am therefore so relieved that everyone can now have the reassurance that they will receive all the necessary technical care they may need and every chance to return to a normal life. This hospital, therefore, offers us an intensely practical message of hope for those who will need it most at this time of national suffering. Let us also pray, ladies and gentlemen, that it will be required for as short a time and for as few people as possible. On behalf of the nation, I want to say a very big thank you to the planners, the builders, the armed forces, the generous companies and organizations which have donated equipment and services, and all the support staff who have made this possible. Also, we owe an immense debt of gratitude to the doctors, the nurses, the technicians, the staff currently working in the health service and those coming out of retirement, and the voluntary workers who will be working within it. And I can only offer my special thoughts and prayers to all those who will receive care within it. And let us hope, ladies and gentlemen, that it will not be too long before this terrible disease has left our land. Now, I need hardly say that the name of this hospital could not have been more aptly chosen. Florence Nightingale, the Lady with the Lamp, brought hope and healing to thousands in their darkest hour. In this dark time, this place will be a shining light. It is symbolic of the selfless care and devoted service taking place in innumerable settings with countless individuals throughout the United Kingdom. Ladies and gentlemen, as the wonders of modern technology can only do so much, and I can't quite reach, perhaps I could invite Nightingale's head of nursing, Natalie Gray, on my behalf to unveil the plaque to declare NHS Nightingale Hospital open.
And after he gave that speech, it was the head of nursing from the hospital who unveiled the plaque for him. So he didn't do it himself, but there was someone on hand to do that very royal job of pulling open a pair of curtains or unveiling a plaque, which he's done, an unbelievable number of times as the Prince of Wales.
Yeah, it's amazing how quickly everyone has adapted to this new way of life. And, only a few weeks ago, when we were still out on engagements, although coronavirus was beginning to spread, was the Duke of Cambridge saying at that 111 visit how they thought going forward that they would be able to do virtual visits and engagements. And here we are, they're actually managing to do it.
When I heard him say that, I thought, no, that'll never happen. I thought, no, why would they need to do that? Well, clearly they do. And even, you could say the Queen's broadcast this week was done virtually from Windsor. Just talking about Windsor, I mean, it's a very big week for the Queen, the Holy Week. It's a big week for a number of religions, of course, and yet there would normally be the traditional Maundy Thursday service. There would be Easter Sunday, going to church. The Queen is going to miss those things personally. That all of that's simply just been wiped off the calendar.
Yeah, for everybody, it's going to be a very strange weekend. Easter, not being able to see friends and family, and that's the same for the Queen and the royal family. You would normally see them all going to church together on Sunday, but we won't.
Actually, similarly, I got asked to work on Saturday, and I thought, oh, it's Easter Saturday. Do everyone want to work on Saturday? And then it was pointed out to me, it's not really an Easter weekend this week. It literally is a Saturday or another day at which you are stuck in your house. So hence why I'm going into work. It's not as if I'm having lots of family round for roast lamb or anything on Sunday, because we are all in this boat together. So we spoke last week about Prince Charles having to be in isolation for 7 days, but his wife, Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall, had to do 14 days because she hadn't shown any symptoms. She's now come out of that isolation, hasn't she?
Yeah, so the Duchess tested negative. She showed no symptoms, but she had to self-isolate for 14 days. But she's out now and is reunited with the Prince of Wales at Birk Hall, their Scottish residence.
I want some of her DNA, because she can actually live with someone who's got coronavirus and not get it, test negative, still have 2 weeks and still not get it. And then she went straight back to work, didn't she?
Straight back to work, no messing about. She was back to work yesterday in her role as president of the Royal Voluntary Service. And they have been calling for people across the country to sign up to volunteer to help the NHS at the moment, doing things from calling people who are at home, isolating, to picking up things from pharmacies, to doing weekly shops. And they initially called out for 250,000 volunteers. They've so far had 750,000 sign up. And initially it was a pool of 1.5 million vulnerable people that these volunteers were going to help. And because the number of volunteers is so huge, they've expanded that to 2.5 million people, which is incredible.
And Lizzie, you're right. This is connected people to the voluntary sector. I think the whole thing, as difficult as it might be, it's bringing out the best in people, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think what we were saying earlier about the Nightingale being built in less than 2 weeks, thousands of volunteers signing up. I mean, it does just show what can be achieved when the whole country pulls together, and I think they are at the moment. And we saw Camilla, when she returned back to work, she returned for one of these check-in and chat calls, which is one of the calls that the voluntary service are offering to help people who are in isolation. And she caught up with 85-year-old Doris Winfield, who has also been self-isolating for the last 2 weeks. So the pair of them had a lot in common. And they spoke about how difficult it is being separated from families at the moment, and how good it is to be able to connect with them digitally. And Camilla said that the hardest thing she felt about isolating was not being able to hug her grandchildren. She's got 5 grandchildren from her 2 children, and then 4 step grandchildren.
And I thought the way in which these national events have also been spotted by the Queen, she spoke in the message of the applause that we've had in the UK, the hashtag clap for our carers. The Queen called that an expression of our national spirit. And she also praised the rainbows that all the kids have been drawing and leaving in the window. So all of this stuff is being noticed by the palace as well. And perhaps we just leave you with an image of the Round Tower at Windsor Castle. If you're watching on YouTube, take a look at this. If you're here listening to us on a podcast, then go and look at this on our Twitter. Mine is at Chrisship ITV. It's the royal family lighting up the Round Tower at Windsor Castle in a bright blue colour, which happened on the evening when the rest of the country was applauding the workers of the NHS, and there were blue messages and blue lights lit up everywhere. And I think that shows you how this is a national effort from the very top, the head of state, all the way down to every single person in the country. I think everyone agrees that we all are having to pull together in this. Yeah,
I think the thanks and the appreciation for the NHS people on the front line and all the key workers that are helping with this crisis. I mean, as we said earlier, it has affected and touched everybody, whether you are, a royal or in government. Everyone is affected by this, and I think that's been recognised by the royal family.
And I think it's just worth us sort of saying to everyone there, thank you for continuing to watch. It all looks a bit different in here, not our usual surroundings. Everything is very different at the moment. Thank you for continuing to watch on YouTube. If you want to subscribe to this as a podcast, you can do so. ITV Royal Rota, just search for that on your favourite podcast platform, be that Spotify or Apple Podcasts, whatever it is that you use. From both of us, though, thank you for continuing to stick with us in these difficult times. I hope wherever you're watching or listening to this that you are keeping well, you're staying safe. And from both of us, bye-bye.